I want you to take a second and just try to imagine your ultimate safe space.
Okay.
Like picture your bedroom, right?
Hmm.
It's late at night, the house is perfectly quiet, you're tucked in, the doors are dead bolted, the windows are shut tight, and, the chaos of the outside world is just completely locked away.
Right, you feel totally secure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I want you to imagine waking up abruptly,
Yeah.
not to a loud noise, but to a sudden glaring red light shining directly into your eyes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it's being held by an absolute stranger standing silently right over your bed.
I mean, just hearing you say that, it completely shatters the fundamental psychological baseline of what a home is even supposed to be.
It really does.
Because when we go to sleep, our brains basically power down our defensive mechanisms, We trust the physical barriers of our environment. So having that barrier breached, waking up to a predatory presence already inside your most vulnerable space, that triggers a physiological terror that, honestly, the human nervous system is simply not built to process or forget.
And that specific physiological terror, that was a nightly reality for residents of São Paulo in the 1960s. Today, we are opening up a true crime documentary script for our deep dive, focusing on a man named João Acácio Pereira da Costa.
Though you probably wouldn't know him by that name, right?
Right, exactly. Brazil, and eventually the rest of the world, came to know him by this heavily mythologized title, the Red Light Bandit.
Which really brings us to the core of why we are diving into these sources today. We're looking at this incredible and frankly disturbing societal mechanism. It's about the speed at which collective visceral fear gets packaged into like a pop culture legend.
Yeah, a character.
Exactly. And the tragic side effect of that transformation is that the actual victims, the families who woke up paralyzed by that red light, they are effectively erased from the narrative.
So that's our mission today. We are going to intentionally strip away all that flashy true crime myth-making.
Yeah.
We're not here to marvel at some cinematic anti-hero.
No, absolutely not.
We are looking past the theatrical framing to really focus on the chilling psychological warfare he waged. We want to talk about the permanent trauma he left in his wake.
And to really grasp the gravity of that trauma, I think we have to look closely at his methodology.
Yeah, how he actually operated.
Right, because the script details this rapidly transforming 1960s São Paulo. It was booming, just morphing into this massive economic powerhouse in South America.
You had this explosive influx of sudden wealth, and with it came the construction of these sprawling mansions in highly affluent, previously quiet neighborhoods.
And whenever you have a rapid stratification of wealth like that, you see an increased desire for insulation. People start building metaphorical and literal fortresses.
The mindset is basically like, if I have enough money, I can buy a barrier between my family and the dangers of the street.
Exactly. But João Acácio completely bypassed those fortresses.
He did. The sources highlight that he was not your typical smash and grab burglar looking for a quick payout. Like, he didn't just kick in the back door.
Right, he was far more calculated.
He spent hours, sometimes days, just observing these massive houses. He mapped out the families, learned their specific routines, memorized the layout of the property.
Right.
And then, and this is the really chilling part, he would slip inside with zero noise while the entire family was in deep REM sleep.
Just carefully moving from room to room.
Yeah.
That meticulousness, that is what elevates this from a property crime to extreme psychological abuse. He didn't just quietly pocket jewelry in the dark and leave. He brought a flashlight, right?
Right. Modified to emit this harsh, unforgettable red glow.
Yes. And he intentionally used it to illuminate the faces of his victims, waking them up to the sight of an intruder standing over them. He wanted them to see him, or at least, see the light.
He wanted to be witnessed.
Exactly. He wanted to be witnessed in their most private sanctuary.
It's like taking the universal childhood fear of the monster under the bed and just manifesting it into reality for grown adults.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Because as a kid, you have this irrational dread of the dark. But eventually, you grow up and rationalize it away. But he weaponized that primitive fear. He proved to these families that the monster was actually real, and it was standing right there in their bedroom.
And the devastation of that realization permanently alters your neurobiology.
How so?
Well, a robbery is a loss of material goods, right? But a home invasion of this specific nature is a loss of reality. When someone violates the sanctuary of the bedroom in that manner, they strip away the victim's fundamental sense of safety in the world.
It's gone.
Completely. Long after the police file their reports, long after the insurance covers the stolen money, those victims have to try to fall asleep in that exact same room, in that exact same bed, every single night for the rest of their lives.
Just waiting for the light.
Yes. The hypervigilance never entirely turns off.
And you actually see that hypervigilance bleed out into the rest of the city, too. The script notes this massive behavioral shift across São Paulo. He fundamentally altered how millions of citizens felt inside their own homes.
The obsession with security just skyrocketed.
People were double-checking locks, reinforcing glass, lying awake, listening to every single creak of a floorboard, just wondering if that red light was about to switch on. It's crazy to think one man managed to hold an entire booming metropolis in a state of chronic anxiety.
Which naturally forces us to examine the origin of that kind of pathological need for control, right? To understand how someone develops a psychology that feeds on terrorizing the powerful, we have to look at the complete lack of power in his own formative years.
Right. Going back to the beginning, he was born in 1942 in Joinville, down in the state of Santa Catarina, and his early life was essentially defined by profound absence.
The historical accounts in our sources paint an incredibly bleak picture.
He was orphaned at a young age and thrust onto the streets. There was no safety net, no stability, no opportunity whatsoever. He was just a completely anonymous, starving child fighting to survive another day.
And he started with petty crimes, mostly out of necessity, before moving to the coastal city of Santos. That's where the severity of his offenses really began to climb.
And then, he discovers the sheer scale of wealth in São Paulo.
Right. And if we view his escalating crimes through a sociological lens, it becomes less about the financial gain and much more about reversing the power dynamics of his youth.
That makes a lot of sense.
By infiltrating the impenetrable fortresses of the city's elite, he was asserting dominance over a society that had completely ignored his existence when he was just a child starving on the streets.
He was systematically forcing the most powerful, insulated people in the country to feel as vulnerable, terrified, and helpless as he had felt.
Exactly. It was a terrifying realization of power.
But, I think we really need to look at the actual statistics from the sources to understand the brutal reality of this so-called reversal of power, because the numbers are sickening. I want to push back on any romanticization here.
Please do.
The official records show 88 total convictions, 77 armed robberies, 7 attempted killings, and 4 deaths resulting directly from his actions. With a rap sheet like that, how did the public ever view him as anything other than a terrifying threat?
Well, it gets even darker. The sources also carefully document allegations of over 100 sexual assaults.
Over 100?
Yes. The script is meticulous in noting that these numbers must be viewed within the context of the era, though. Many of these victims never formally went to the police.
Which is entirely understandable when you look at the social climate of Brazil in the 1960s. The immense social stigma, the paralyzing shame, and, frankly, the sheer terror of knowing this man knows exactly where you sleep.
Right.
The lack of official convictions for those specific assaults doesn't invalidate the massive silent burden of trauma carried by dozens, maybe hundreds, of women who survived them.
No, it doesn't. It really highlights a massive blind spot in how history records crime. The official rap sheet only tells us what the legal system could definitively prove in a courtroom. It completely fails to capture the invisible casualties.
And this is exactly where I struggle to comprehend the cultural reaction. We are looking at a man with 88 convictions, 4 dead bodies, and a trail of shattered lives. How does a society look at that resume of violence and construct an anti-hero? The media narrative surrounding this guy is just baffling to me.
It is baffling, but it speaks to a very dangerous mechanism in mass media, the commodification of fear.
Like selling the panic.
Exactly. True terror is chaotic and unpredictable, which makes people feel helpless. But if the media can package that terror into a digestible narrative, give it a catchy name, a recognizable modus operandi, they create an illusion of understanding.
So the newspapers dubbed him the Red Light Bandit.
Right, directly lifting the moniker from a notorious California criminal from around that time, Carol Chessman.
And by calling him a bandit, they immediately inject this false sense of romanticism.
Yeah.
A bandit sounds like a rogue from an old Western movie, an outlaw bucking the system.
It completely masks the sadistic, invasive reality of shining a light into a terrified family's eyes.
It really does. They tracked his movements in the press like he was the protagonist in a serialized thriller.
And that fictionalization serves a dual purpose. For the media, obviously, it sells an incredible amount of papers. But for the public, it provides a psychological buffer.
A buffer.
Yeah, fictionalizing a thread makes it feel manageable. You can discuss a character over coffee with your friends. You can't casually discuss the reality of a brutal home invader standing over your child's bed. The theatrical nickname distances the public from the raw horror.
It distanced them so much that they actually put it on the silver screen. In 1968, literally just 1 year after he was finally apprehended, filmmaker Rogério Sganzerla released a movie based on him.
A movie that became a landmark of Brazilian cinema, no less.
Yeah. It wasn't just some niche project. It cemented his status not as a serial terrorizer, but as a cultural icon. It makes me want to ask you, the listener, do we, as a society, naturally assign these catchy nicknames as a coping mechanism? Like, is it our way of fictionalizing the horror so we don't have to face the fact that these are actual human beings destroying real flesh and blood families?
I think it absolutely is a defense mechanism, but one that comes at a terrible moral cost. The immense danger of this myth-making machine is the total erasure of the victim's humanity.
Right.
When a criminal is elevated to the status of a legend, the public's focus narrows entirely onto the spectacle of the perpetrator. The pain of the people who were assaulted, the grief of the families whose loved ones were murdered, that all becomes inconvenient background noise to the legend.
The victims literally become extras in a movie about their own trauma.
It's tragic.
For the families of those 4 murder victims, or the hundreds of people dealing with lifelong PTSD, there was no entertaining movie poster. There was just an empty chair at the dinner table, and a bedroom they were too terrified to sleep in.
Exactly.
The contrast between their enduring silent nightmare and the public's fleeting entertainment is genuinely stomach-turning.
It demands a complete refocusing of our historical lens. We have to actively resist the gravitational pull of the catchy headline and intentionally center the people who bore the actual cost of his crimes. Because the reality of the man himself, devoid of all the media's framing, was far from untouchable.
Right. The Phantom of the Night was eventually just a guy who made a very human mistake. In August of 1967, the myth cracked.
He was finally caught.
Yeah, he was spotted and recognized by a civilian in Curitiba, a city in the southern state of Paraná. The police quickly coordinated an ambush, and just like that, the great, terrifying red light bandit was in handcuffs.
And the judicial process that followed laid bare the sheer volume of his destruction. After being convicted across those 88 separate cases, the judge handed down a sentence that, on paper, sounded like an absolute eradication of the threat.
The cumulative sentences totaled more than 351 years behind bars.
351 years.
I mean, to the general public, reading that in the newspaper, it feels like absolute justice. It sounds like the legal system has permanently excised this monster from society.
It does sound like that.
But the sources reveal a massive legal caveat. At the time, the Brazilian Penal Code had a strict maximum limit on incarceration. Regardless of the accumulated sentence, no individual could serve more than 30 years in prison.
It's important to understand the philosophy behind that law, though. The Brazilian legal framework was heavily influenced by human rights principles that view permanent, lifelong imprisonment as a form of cruel and unusual punishment.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, the 30-year cap is rooted in a philosophy of rehabilitative justice. The belief that the penal system should eventually return a citizen to society, rather than just acting as a punitive warehouse.
And that is a very noble legal philosophy in a vacuum, but apply that philosophy to the families who survived João Acácio.
That's where it falls apart.
Right. To them, that 351-year sentence wasn't justice. It was an illusion. It was a giant, colorful Band-Aid slapped over a gaping wound just to make the public feel safe. But for the victims, it was a ticking clock. The state was legally guaranteeing that the man who had irreparably shattered their lives would walk free again.
The psychological toll of that reality on the survivors is just hard to fathom. Imagine trying to heal, trying to move on, while knowing with mathematical certainty that your attacker is simply waiting out the calendar.
Just counting the days.
Yeah. And while Brazil rapidly modernized around them, transitioning through the 70s, the 80s, and into the 90s, the victims remain psychologically tethered to that 30-year countdown.
And what makes it even more unsettling are the details the script provides about his time inside. He didn't just quietly serve his time in a standard cell.
No, he didn't.
He spent significant periods in psychiatric institutions within the prison system, which raises massive unresolved questions about his baseline mental health. Was he suffering from severe psychiatric illnesses? Was there any genuine attempt at, or possibility of, the rehabilitation the legal system was banking on.
And those questions were never definitively answered for the public. They just lingered in the background, overshadowed by the relentless ticking of that clock, until, inevitably, the math caught up with the myth.
Right. In August of 1997, the 30 years were up. The prison doors opened, and João Acacio Pereira da Costa walked out into the world. He was 55 years old.
It creates an incredibly surreal juxtaposition, doesn't it? You have the ultimate boogeyman of the 1960s stepping out into a modern society that has entirely bypassed him.
Everything had changed.
The technology, the infrastructure, the culture of São Paulo, it had all evolved. He was no longer the phantom with the flashlight. He was just an aging, institutionalized man.
He heads back to his hometown of Joinville, the exact place he started as an anonymous street kid, and he ends up staying with a family member. From a storytelling perspective, you almost brace yourself for a quiet fade-out, a silent epilogue to a loud life.
But the reality of severe, unaddressed psychological issues rarely allows for a quiet epilogue.
No, it doesn't. Exactly 5 months later, January 1998, he gets into a domestic altercation. He violently attacks a family member where he's staying. The situation rapidly deteriorates, and a local fisherman named Nelson Pilsinger intervenes, shooting and killing him with a shotgun.
The finality of it is just so jarring.
It is the ultimate anticlimax. The national obsession, the man who held millions hostage in their own bedrooms, the subject of cinematic reverence. He doesn't go out in a blaze of glory. He dies in a chaotic, petty dispute in a coastal town. There is no grand finale.
And the mundane nature of his death sharply underscores the overarching tragedy of this entire deep dive. The physical threat was eliminated, the flashlight was turned off, but the psychological damage didn't disappear with him.
Not at all.
The real horror of this story is how deeply rooted trauma can outlive both the perpetrator and the immediate victims. It reverberates through generations, mutating from a stark warning about real violence into a sterilized cultural myth.
Which leaves us with a lot to process about how we engage with these narratives today. We've traced an arc from the visceral terror of a glowing red light in a pitch-black bedroom, through an escalating spree of violence, into a massive media sensation, and ending in a sudden, gritty death.
It really forces a mirror onto our own consumption habits.
It does. We have to look past the captivating headlines of the true crime genre and force ourselves to remember the quiet, enduring suffering of the people who actually live through it.
And I think it also leaves us with a highly provocative question about causality and responsibility, something you have to deduce when looking at the sociology of this case.
What's that?
Well, if the 1960s press had refused to give him that theatrical, terrifying moniker, if they hadn't baptized him the Red Light Bandit, would he have felt the psychological pressure to escalate his violence to match his new public persona?
Wow. That is a heavy thought.
Did the media's myth-making stroke his ego and actively drive him to commit increasingly brazen crimes? In an era where we consume true crime as daily entertainment, we have to grapple with the possibility that the way we report on and obsess over these individuals might inadvertently encourage them to become the very monsters we are so afraid of.
It is a heavy, necessary question.
Yeah.
And it brings us right back to the only place this story actually matters, the victims. Forget the cinematic nicknames. Forget the movie. Remember the families who thought they were safe behind locked doors. Remember the absolute silence of a bedroom at night and the peace of mind that was stolen and never, ever returned.